A flight attendant sprayed air freshener toward a black CEO, but with one calm move, he immediately turned the situation around, leaving the crew stunned. A flight attendant sprayed air freshener in the black CEO's face, thinking no one would react. He didn't realize that one breath later, it would be the last mistake he ever made. Subscribe if you believe arrogance always collapses when true authority rises. The flight attendant didn't smile. He didn't even nod. He stepped forward, blocking the aisle with one arm and his cart with the other. "Name?" he asked. Dr. Kael Drevick paused. His boarding pass was in plain view, tucked securely into the front pocket of his tailored charcoal blazer. The bold black lettering read First Class, Seat 1A. But the man in front of him, a lean, pale-skinned attendant with clipped blonde hair and a name tag that read Norrin Vale, acted as though none of it mattered. His eyes flicked from Kael's face to the carry-on bag gripped in his right hand, then back again. Kael kept his voice low and steady. "Kael Drevick." Norrin's lips curled, not into a smile, but something closer to a smirk. "Keep your bag close. Can't guarantee anything around here," he muttered, already turning toward the galley. "No welcome." No gesture to his seat, just a thinly veiled warning in place of hospitality. Kael stepped past him in silence and took his seat. Seat 1A, window side, just as he'd chosen, far enough from the cockpit to be discreet, yet close enough for tactical positioning if necessary. He stowed his carry-on carefully beneath the seat in front and placed his briefcase, black, unmarked, fingerprint-locked, on his lap for a moment before easing it into the compartment beside his leg. The compartment clicked shut with a metallic finality. He exhaled, slow and measured. This was the test. He hadn't told anyone, not his board, not even his assistant, but this wasn't just a flight. It was a real-world audit, a deliberate exposure to variables. Kael Drevick, CEO of Nexelian Dynamics, was traveling under full identity, but no announcements, no flags, no corporate handlers. He wanted to see how Telvian Air treated passengers like him, quiet, observant, and black. And the first 5 minutes already told him more than any compliance spreadsheet ever could. The cabin around him began to fill. Passengers in first class murmured to each other, settling into plush leather seats. A man in 3C flipped through a sports magazine. An older gentleman, too, rose back, asked for extra legroom. And a younger male trainee attendant with sandy brown hair, badge reading Kellen Voss, scurried to adjust a footrest with nervous efficiency. Kael sat still. His eyes tracked the reflection of movement in the polished frame of the bulkhead wall beside him. Norrin Vale passed by once, then again, each time without eye contact, without water, without the tray of mints he'd seen offered to other passengers. Instead, Norrin was holding something. A canister. Silver. Pressurized. He sprayed it near row 2, then row 4. Always near the aisle. A burst. Not a mist. Too sharp. Too controlled. Kael frowned. The scent hit his nostrils like the tang of metal laced with alcohol. Not lavender. Not citrus. No branding. No label. As Norrin approached again, he paused at Kael's row, and with the faintest flick of his wrist, he aimed the nozzle and sprayed directly toward Kael's face. The burst struck like a slap, unexpected, immediate, penetrating. Kael inhaled sharply before instinct told him not to. His throat seized. A spike of pain surged down his esophagus, followed by an acidic burn along his sinus. He lurched back into the headrest, blinking rapidly as his vision blurred. His fingers gripped the armrest. His chest tightened, not from fear, but from something sharper, something artificial. The chemical compound lingered in the air, unnatural, almost clinical. He knew that scent. This wasn't air freshener. It was industrial. He caught his breath just in time to hear Norrin's voice, light and fake. "Oops, must have slipped." Then the man was gone, just like that, walking up the aisle as if nothing had happened. Kael remained motionless. The cabin hadn't seen the full exchange, but they saw the aftermath. A few heads turned. A man across the aisle furrowed his brow. But no one said anything. No one ever did at first. Kael's eyes found the trainee, Kellen, who stood by the galley doors, frozen. He had seen it. His face had gone pale. His hands were shaking slightly where they held the corner of the snack cart. Kael swallowed the burn in his throat and reached beneath his seat, retrieving a small black pouch from his carry-on. He unzipped it with practiced speed, removed a carbon-lined oxygen mask, and fitted it discreetly beneath his chin. A slow, filtered breath cleared some of the stinging. The mask buzzed quietly, initiating a scan. Compound trace detected. Not fatal, but designed to irritate. Deliberate exposure. His mind sharpened, cutting through the fog. This wasn't improvisation. It was execution. Someone had coordinated this. Someone knew who he was. The chip schematics in his briefcase. The ethics presentation scheduled in Veltron City. The public accusations of elitism against Nexelian. And now this. An unscheduled test of whether Kael Drevick could be provoked into failure. But they didn't know him. He tapped twice on the inside wall of the tray table, activating a covert recording feature embedded into his wrist relay. His smart device logged the incident, synced encrypted footage to a private node, and initiated a monitoring subroutine. All silent, all invisible. His heartbeat slowed. This was no longer a flight. It was a case. He leaned his head against the side panel, eyes open but expression unreadable, and reviewed what he already knew. Norrin Vale. Aggressive behavior. Hostile spray. Deliberate targeting. No apology offered. No record of routine protocol. And the strangest part, the cabin's scent still lingered. It wasn't a fragrance. It was a message. The air smelled like something was already off. The nozzle clicked just inches from Kael Drevick's face. A sharp, pressurized burst struck him mid-sentence. No warning, no apology. The sound was crisp, metallic, and strangely deliberate. For a heartbeat, time fractured. His throat seized. His eyes watered instantly. The air around him twisted into a suffocating fog of bitter, synthetic scent. He recoiled instinctively, head snapping back, one hand rising to shield his face, the other fumbling for his armrest. The back of his throat screamed, raw acidic. Not lavender. Not lemon. Something chemical. Something wrong. Coughing erupted from his lungs as his vision blurred. The rows around him stirred. Passengers looked up, their conversations halted mid-air, forks frozen between trays and mouths. Even those wearing headphones pulled them off as Kael fought to clear his airway, chest jerking forward in silent spasms. "Oops, must have slipped," muttered the man holding the canister, Norrin Vale, the flight attendant with a name tag that hadn't matched his demeanor since boarding. His tone carried no apology, only mockery dressed in a service smile. Without another word, he turned sharply on his heel and disappeared up the aisle, his grip still loose around the silver canister, as if nothing had happened. Kael leaned sideways, away from the residual cloud, now hanging near row 2A. His eyes streamed involuntarily. The scent clung to the air like a glue. A few passengers glanced over, puzzled. One man squinted and sniffed. Another leaned toward his companion and whispered, "That didn't smell right." But no one moved. Across the aisle, a young male flight attendant, Kellen, clearly a trainee, sat bolt upright in his jump seat rotation. His face was pale, eyes locked on Norrin's retreating figure, jaw clenched like he was biting back the urge to speak. He looked young, uncertain, frightened. Kael caught his gaze briefly. Kellen looked away. Kael's mind was already recalibrating. He reached slowly beneath his seat, removed a thin, black oxygen pouch, and slipped it onto his lap like a folded blanket. His fingers moved swiftly but calmly. From within the pouch, he extracted a small carbon-filtered mask and inhaled twice short practice pulls. The immediate burn in his lungs began to ease, but his thoughts didn't. That wasn't air freshener. It had been too close, too strong. Not a sweeping cabin mist, but a direct, weaponized burst. Not the kind that neutralized odors, but the kind that tested reactions. His hand drifted to his wrist device. Sync stable. Battery full. Briefcase secure. All three green. His tech, modified and proprietary, began recording audio discreetly. The soft chime inside his earpiece confirmed activation. Every sound from this moment forward would be logged, time-stamped, and uploaded the moment connectivity resumed. He turned slightly and lowered his tray table. Not for a meal, For procedure, he placed a silk handkerchief over the surface, clean, white, untouched, methodical, a controlled space to process the uncontrolled. And still, the scent lingered. Kellen slowly rose from his seat, hesitated, then walked down the aisle. His knuckles were white around the water bottle in his grip, but he didn't stop at Kael's row. He didn't offer help. He just walked past him, eyes downcast. Kael stared after him, every muscle calculating. Across the cabin, another man stirred, seat 3C. White, early 40s, clean-shaven. Kael had noted him before. No carry-on, no meal tray, no signs of travel fatigue. Just stillness. Observation. The man leaned forward as Norrin passed him again and muttered something inaudible. Kael couldn't hear the words, but he saw the nod that followed. Small, satisfied. He felt a cold thread wrap around the edge of his awareness. The moment had shifted. Kael's fingers tapped twice on the edge of his tray table, a command sequence. From deep within the lining of his briefcase, a backup camera, hidden near the clasp, activated and began transmitting. The feed would arrive at Exilian's secure compliance vault within minutes. He didn't need it reviewed yet. Just logged. Just real. Norrin came down the aisle again, cart in tow, smiling at passengers, offering drinks with exaggerated friendliness. Kael watched as he poured water for row 1, juice for row 2B, and coffee for 2C. He skipped 2A. Skipped Kael without so much as a glance. He paused at row 3, chatting lightly with a man in 3C. Kael's voice was hoarse but clear. What was in that can? It came out dry, like paper rubbed against stone. Kellen turned slightly, startled. He hesitated, looked both ways, then stepped closer, barely leaning in. We're not allowed to use it that close to the face, he whispered quickly, as if afraid the sentence would leave a bruise. That wasn't protocol. I don't even recognize that brand. Kael stared forward. Then he's not just violating protocol. He turned his head, meeting the young man's eyes fully now, cold but precise. He's testing something. Kellen's lips parted slightly, as if to respond, but nothing came. He stepped back, returning to the jump seat like a soldier who had just seen the enemy in his own ranks. Kael folded his arms slowly, leaning back against the seat. He stared ahead, blinking past the stinging dryness still coating his throat. The adrenaline had settled behind his ribcage, not yet ready to surface as panic. He wouldn't give them that. He never had. They wanted a reaction. They wanted him unsettled, vocal, off-center. But Kael had built an empire on staying composed in chaos. From somewhere in the galley, he heard the click of the canister again. The scent trailed faintly in the pressurized air, acrylic and bitter. Foreshadowing sharpened into certainty. This wasn't a slip of the wrist. This was a message. And Kael had just started listening. That wasn't air freshener. It was a message. Kael's throat burned. The chemical hit hadn't faded. It lingered, clawing down into his lungs like an invisible thread woven from ammonia and synthetic sting. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached for his wrist relay, pressing the inner edge of the titanium band twice. The device vibrated softly, confirming audio capture had begun. A small green light blinked against his skin. His instincts, long trained by a decade of developing security-level ethics systems, told him one thing. This wasn't a mistake. It was a test. His vision hadn't fully cleared, but he forced himself to focus. The AI chip embedded beneath the seat was still safe, untouched, shielded in layered casing within the briefcase. But his clarity was dipping in waves, like a signal barely holding through static. Whatever chemical had been in that burst, it wasn't meant to knock him out, it was designed to interfere. Kael leaned back slowly, trying not to show how tight his breath had become. His fingers tapped out a message on his wrist. Something's off. Prep emergency relay node. Maybe targeted. Logging in flight behavior. He sent it to Varric, his chief assistant, then blinked twice to confirm upload to the off-grid mirror server. Across the aisle, in seat 3C, a man leaned slightly forward. He was white, mid-40s, with close-cut hair and a pale blue travel jacket that looked too clean for a long-haul flight. Kael noted the man had no tray table down, no water, no reading material, no visible carry-on. He hadn't moved during the earlier burst. Now he simply observed. And when Norrin Vale, the flight attendant with the tight jaw and too many stares, walked by again, the man in 3C tilted his head and muttered something under his breath. Norrin nodded. It wasn't casual. It wasn't customer service theater. It was a signal. A pass-off. A cue. Kael's skin chilled. The cough in his chest was no longer light. His ribs ached faintly. He tapped the tray table twice with his index finger. A mechanical click confirmed the backup camera embedded in the corner of his briefcase had begun streaming. A tiny lens rotated to face the aisle, capturing everything, from seat 3C's posture to Norrin's approach. The footage streamed silently to Nexelian's cloud compliance node. Kael's jaw tightened. Moments later, Norrin returned, rolling a beverage cart down the aisle with performative cheer. Water, soda, juice, sparkling, anything I can get you? He asked each row with feigned politeness, handing out drinks and napkins. Except Kael's row. He bypassed it entirely. Not even a glance. Kael stared straight ahead, but Kellen, the young trainee in the forward jump seat, noticed. His fingers nervously clutched the edge of his harness. His eyes darted to Kael, then to Norrin, then back again. He looked pale. Kael turned his head slowly. Kellen tried to look away, but Kael's voice stopped him, quiet, raw, cracked from the earlier burst. What was in that can? Kellen hesitated. I'm not sure, sir, he whispered, glancing quickly at the galley. But that's not the standard citrus unit. We're trained not to use sprays near passengers' faces. That close. That's not protocol. And I don't even recognize that brand. Kael nodded slightly. He felt it now, proof settling into his bones. Norrin Vale wasn't just improvising. He wasn't angry or careless. He was testing something. And the man in 3C, still unmoved, hands folded on his knee, wasn't a passenger. He was watching Kael like an observer monitoring results in a sterile lab. Kael narrowed his eyes, his mind calculating. Protocols, triggers, variables. He had designed AI to detect behavioral anomalies in enclosed ecosystems. Now he was living inside one. They were watching for a reaction. If he fought, if he panicked, if he made a scene, they would label him unstable. And the footage wouldn't matter. Because the real trial wasn't about proving damage. It was about proving control. He exhaled through his nose and leaned back, coughing once more into his sleeve. His lungs still burned, but his thoughts were sharper now. They wanted fear. He would give them documentation. He pressed another sequence on his wrist relay, low-frequency, trigger mode. It would now detect ambient EM signals from any unauthorized device within 10 feet. A soft vibration pulsed in response. Active transmission nearby. He didn't turn his head toward 3C, but he knew. They had placed a node near him. Maybe under the seat. Maybe embedded in the tray. Maybe the man himself was carrying a stealth transmitter. Kael's tech, once used to study integrity under pressure, was now being weaponized against him. The irony tasted worse than the chemical sting. He blinked twice, logging every timestamp. Kellen looked again, this time with worry thick on his face. He mouthed silently. Are you okay? Kael didn't answer. Instead, his hand brushed his blazer pocket. Inside, he touched the flat disc of his carbon filter mask, compact, hidden, reserved for emergencies. But he didn't put it on. Not yet. That would be a declaration. He needed one more piece of confirmation. And then it came. Norrin walked by again, brushing Kael's seat with the edge of the beverage cart. Too hard to be an accident. Kael's shoulder jostled, sending a ripple of pain through his neck. Norrin smiled. Oops, he muttered, not stopping. Kael didn't flinch. He didn't rise. He didn't even blink. But his mind locked into place. This wasn't irritation. It wasn't coincidence. It was a layered compliance test, one that echoed too closely to the confidential programs he had once helped shut down. Programs labeled behavioral drift monitoring. Programs that probed high-risk individuals mid-flight. Illegal. Unethical. Hidden behind scent and courtesy. Kael's voice returned, low and calm. You know who I am? Norrin paused, then turned slowly. His smirk stayed. Just a passenger with allergies, I guess. Kael stared into the man's eyes. And that was the moment clarity cut through. Someone had told him. Someone knew exactly what Kael carried. The encrypted ethics chip, the private protocol presentation, maybe even the embedded safeguards in his AI. They weren't targeting the cabin. They were targeting him. Somewhere near the galley, Kael heard it, barely a whisper, spoken too fast for any other passenger to catch. But he trained his ear on subtler threats. Test reaction protocol. He memorized the phrase. His strategy shifted. No more flinching. No more protest. He wouldn't give them the spike they wanted. Instead, he would collect. Record. Document. Let the evidence mount. Let them panic. Because as the program unfolded and the chemical trace dried along the rim of his nostril, Kael knew one thing with certainty. When they try to provoke you and you stay still, that's when they panic. The cart struck Kael's shoulder with a jolt. Not hard enough to cause visible injury. Just enough to disrupt posture. Enough to provoke. Enough to test. Kael didn't flinch. He didn't wince. He simply lifted his head and looked directly at Norrin Vale, who stood behind the meal cart with an expression that was far too calm. Too staged. His lips parted in mock surprise. "Apologies," he said with a half-smile that didn't touch his eyes. Bit of turbulence. There was no turbulence. The plane was level, stable. The engines purred with the smooth cadence of a well-cruised altitude. The lights didn't flicker. The passengers didn't sway. Kael noted it all instantly. Norrin's body language, shoulders slightly hunched, hand bracing the top of the cart too late, signaled intention, not accident. Kael slowly straightened in his seat. "You know who I am?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Norrin tilted his head slightly, the smirk still there. "Just a passenger with allergies, I guess." The words landed with surgical precision. It wasn't a denial. It wasn't a taunt. It was a signal. Someone had told him. Kael's heart rate ticked up by a few beats, though his breathing remained deliberate, controlled. He blinked once, twice, and then reached down to tap his wrist device. A discrete sensor displayed on the inside of his sleeve, small numbers, faint red. A mild spike in ammonium exposure. The compound wasn't lethal, but it was foreign. Cognitive disruption was possible. That explained the haze behind his eyes. The slight tremor when he'd first sat back. He ran a secondary diagnostic. No alarms. No threat to life. But clarity had been compromised. That was the play. He triggered a decontamination subroutine and, moments later, requested hot water from the jump seat trainee, Kellen, who still looked visibly rattled. Kellen returned quickly, hands shaking as he handed Kael a cup. "Here you go, sir," he whispered, eyes flickering toward Norrin's direction. Kael nodded once, offering a small, almost imperceptible smile. Then he reached into the side flap of his briefcase and retrieved a narrow chemical strip. He dipped it into the steaming cup, waited 3 seconds. The paper changed color. Light red, not lavender or green or any of the neutral indicators. Ammonium-based, not standard air freshener. A test compound, synthetic dispersal formula, meant for compliance trials, not cabin deodorizing. Kael's fingers moved with silent precision. He sealed the cup in a containment pouch and labeled it with a timestamp. The storage bag slipped back into his briefcase like it had never existed. Then came the words, barely audible, from the galley. A whisper. Test reaction protocol. Kael's attention snapped toward the source without turning his head. The voice belonged to someone speaking into a private comm, not Norrin. Not Kellen. Possibly one of the rotating attendants or the pilot's proxy through an auxiliary line. He couldn't confirm yet, but the phrase chilled him. Test reaction protocol. That term hadn't been spoken aloud in years. It was legacy language back from the early days of emotion mapping under stress conditions. Before the practice had been outlawed in public transport environments. Someone was running an unauthorized field trial, and Kael had just become their data point. He sat still, drawing a long, calm breath through his filtered mask tucked inside his collar seam. No more reactive gestures. No more expressions. He stilled his hands, lowered his eyelids slightly, and let the weight of silence settle into his bones. This was no longer a confrontation. It was a collection mission. Everything that happened now was evidence. Kellen passed again. Their eyes met briefly. The trainee's mouth tightened as if to speak, but then he looked away. His walk was uneven, like he was unsure whether to return to the jump seat or disappear entirely. Kael tapped his leg twice, an unconscious trigger that activated his briefcase's internal sensor array. The thermal scanner hummed quietly. He knew where every passenger's heat signature was now, where the air dispersion had reached, where it was concentrated. He saw the map overlay on his inner sleeve display. His seat, row 2A, was the central exposure point. Across the aisle, Renard Voss sat still, arms crossed. Kael hadn't acknowledged him yet. Not fully, but the memory of that earlier whisper, of Renard's knowing chuckle, remained lodged in Kael's awareness like a thorn pressed under a thumbnail. They were testing him, not with weapons, not with threats, with calculation, with compound dispersal, credibility sabotage, and psychological manipulation. They were seeing how long it would take before he raised his voice, lost control, or collapsed. But they hadn't accounted for this. Kael Drevick, once the lead architect of Nexelian's ethical cognition framework, didn't break. He documented. He began logging every detail. Time-stamped glances, wrist temperatures of nearby passengers, changes in cabin humidity. He noted who coughed, who shifted uncomfortably, who looked confused. He wrote a phrase in his notepad, silent compliance pressure, then another. This isn't a test of resistance. It's a measurement of submission. He wrote one last phrase and underlined it twice. Reactive silence distorts their algorithm. From the front galley, Norrin leaned out again, glanced toward him, and then disappeared behind the service curtain. Kael didn't follow with his eyes. He didn't track the movement. He just waited. He watched the air settle. He watched the way people shifted in their seats, unaware they were part of something larger. He let the discomfort pass through him like static. And as the cabin lights dimmed slightly, indicating the pre-meal sequence, Kael allowed one final thought to echo through his mind. When they try to provoke you and you stay still, that's when they panic. The man in 3C rose slowly, stretching his arms as if casually loosening his back, but Kael's wrist display had already confirmed what his instinct screamed. Renard Voss. Former executive. Former friend. Former problem. Terminated from Nexelian 2 years ago after a confidential ethics breach. Kael didn't move. He simply watched, eyes tracking every shift in Renard's posture. Renard leaned toward him under the guise of adjusting his collar. His breath was warm, his voice low and mocking. You're still predictable, Kael. One spray and look at you. His smile was tight, rehearsed. It didn't reach his eyes. Kael didn't flinch. And you're still disposable, he said without emotion, his voice a calm blade beneath the roar of cabin pressure. The silence between them was thick, electric, and far too knowing. Across the aisle, Kellen sat motionless, eyes wide. His fingers clenched around the in-flight manual in his lap, knuckles white. He watched as Norrin Vale returned with another canister in hand. This one was slightly smaller, matte silver instead of chrome, the label half-peeled but different from the last. Norrin made no announcement. He simply moved toward the front galley, spraying a few bursts into the air as if performing a maintenance ritual no one asked for. But now, the passengers were paying attention. An elderly man 3 rows back coughed, then again louder. Why does it smell like nail polish remover up here? He said gruffly, his voice strained. Several passengers looked up from their devices. A woman tapped her nose and grimaced. Norrin ignored them all, walking stiffly, mechanically, as though bound by instructions etched into bone. Kael coughed, not theatrically, genuinely. His lungs tightened, vision tinged with a faint red at the corners. He had minutes, maybe less, before the second compound began interfering with clarity. That's when he made his decision. Without a word, he unlatched the tray table with the same deliberate grace he'd used before, the soft click muffled by the rising hum of confused murmurs. Beneath it, hidden in the padded seam, his fingers pressed against the emergency pulse trigger on his wrist device. A vibration confirmed transmission. Across the country, his headquarters received the silent alert. Nexelian's compliance system logged the GPS signature, cabin pressure data, chemical trace logs, and audio cues. Protocol Delta, 7 had officially begun. Kael stood slowly, his hand gripping the seat back to steady himself as another wave of dizziness passed. "This ends now," he muttered, just loud enough for Kellen to hear. Then, louder, clear, resolute, not theatrical but commanding, "I'm being deliberately exposed to chemical irritants by a flight attendant acting under unauthorized instructions." Every head in first class turned. "I'm the CEO of Nexelian Dynamics, and I request immediate intervention upon landing." Silence dropped over the cabin like a shroud. Phones lifted. Cameras turned. Passengers froze mid-motion. The clatter of utensils stilled. Kellen stood too, lips parted but unable to speak. Norrin didn't move. The spray can in his hand hung, suspended, nozzle twitching ever so slightly. He turned toward Kael, his jaw working, eyes calculating. But the damage was done. Kael's words had triggered more than just protocol. They triggered awareness. In row 5, a young man leaned into the aisle, phone already filming. The elderly man muttered again, "They picked the wrong guy today." Kael didn't blink. He didn't back down. His voice, though raw, carried strength through the recycled air. They tried to mask the danger with fragrance. Now the whole cabin could smell the lie. The cabin erupted in hushed whispers as passengers leaned into one another, asking what had just happened. Kael didn't flinch. He had long trained himself to stay still when the air changed, and right now, it had, subtly but with precision. Something had crossed a line, and everyone could feel it. A few rows back, someone raised their phone. The soft click of a recording app punctuated the silence. Another passenger leaned into the aisle, eyes flicking from Kael to the galley and back again. The tension no longer hid beneath pleasantries. It coiled in the silence, waiting for a spark. Norrin moved first. He approached swiftly from the galley, a tight-lipped smile stretched unnaturally across his face. His voice was calm, but it carried an edge. "Sir, you're clearly under stress. Please return to your seat." Kael didn't move. His voice cut through the air, firm and steady. "Step back. This is being streamed live to our compliance server." A collective pause followed. Even the hum of the aircraft seemed to falter. Norrin's steps slowed. For a split second, his mask cracked, an involuntary flinch, a sideways glance. Toward 3C, toward Renard Vos. Renard didn't move, but his eyes narrowed. Without a word, Norrin turned sharply and walked briskly back toward the galley, his posture rigid. Kael exhaled silently through his nose and slowly turned his head to the row behind him. A middle-aged man sat upright, clutching his armrest. A younger passenger held his phone halfway up, not even hiding it anymore. Kael addressed them in a low but audible tone. "I'm going to ask the captain for a secure cabin review. I suggest anyone who smelled that chemical note the symptoms now. Your safety might depend on it." There was a rustle of nods, a few murmurs of agreement. Someone whispered, "It burned my nose too." Another voice added, "That's not normal air freshener." Kael sat back slowly, thoughts racing. He opened a note field on his device and typed a phrase he had just heard, quiet but distinct, muttered from the galley when Norrin passed through earlier. Aero sent Protocol 6C. He didn't recognize it immediately, but it had the cadence of a program code, not a product. That kind of phrasing didn't belong in airline sanitation routines. It belonged in experimental testing environments. And suddenly, it all connected. The scent, the behavioral targeting, the presence of Renard Vos, the off-manifest behavior, and the silence from the cockpit. Telvian Air had no public record of misconduct. But Kael remembered a quiet mention from a former colleague about behavioral compliance grants being offered under the table, trial programs with no transparency, sold to airlines desperate to boost in-flight compliance. Renard Vos had been part of structuring those grants once. Before he was fired, Norrin re-emerged from the galley, but something was different. He now wore a badge around his neck. Kael narrowed his eyes. The name tag read Norrin Vale, not Norrin. His voice came out low but clear. "You switched name tags mid-flight." He raised his wrist device, took a photo. Passengers were no longer whispering. They were staring. The cabin had shifted. The facade was cracking. "You're done," Kael said evenly. Norrin, or Martin, or whoever he was, stood still. Then, his reply came in a voice that was no longer performative. Soft, controlled, but laced with warning. You shouldn't have boarded alone. Kael met his eyes and held the gaze. Then he spoke, calm as ever. But I didn't. I brought the truth with me. The cabin lights dimmed with a soft hum, the overhead glow fading into a pale orange meant to ease the transition to meal service. But nothing about the atmosphere felt routine anymore. The tension lingered in the recycled air, heavy as a coiled wire stretched too tight. Somewhere in row 4, a fork clattered to the floor, louder than it should have sounded. Kael didn't flinch. 2 passengers seated just behind him leaned forward, their voices hushed but urgent. One, a man in a business vest with a pen clipped to his collar, asked, "Is this normal? That guy sprayed something earlier. Is it safe now?" Kellen, the young trainee flight attendant standing near the service cart, turned slowly. His knuckles were white against the tray handle. "Please remain calm," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Everything is under review. We're following protocol." But the words didn't match his eyes. They darted between Kael and the galley like a man watching a fuse spark toward a hidden barrel. He was scared. Kael didn't respond. He reached calmly into the encrypted compartment inside his briefcase, unclipping a slim disk about the size of a silver dollar. Its surface shimmered faintly with a matte glow. He pressed the center once. The disk gave a quiet pulse, then began neutralizing particles in a meter-wide radius. He slid it discreetly between the side panel and his seat. The air around him began to feel clearer, still synthetic, but no longer invasive. At the front of the cabin, Norrin Vale stood angled toward the wall-mounted handset. He cupped his palm to hide his words. His voice was low but fast, like someone issuing a desperate request. Kael noted it. Norrin wasn't using the standard flight network. He was likely triggering the internal crew override, a communications channel not monitored in real time by the cockpit. Kael tapped his wrist twice. Timestamp logged. Audio relay on standby. The small vibration in his forearm was subtle but unmistakable. His assistant's signal had come through. Signal received. Regulatory alert triggered. Landing response active. Continue logging. Kael closed his eyes for half a second. One breath. One reset. Then he opened them and looked straight ahead, calm, resolute. Every move was calculated now. Across the aisle, Renard Voss shifted in his seat. He stretched lazily, then leaned back and smirked. "You really think this'll do anything?" he asked, his voice thick with contempt. "It's your word against a cruise." Kael didn't blink. He didn't even look at him. Instead, he slowly reached into the inside pocket of his blazer, withdrew a small identification card, and held it in the air, level with his shoulder. His voice carried clearly across several rows. "This is a federal compliance badge," Kael said. "I'm not here as just a CEO. I'm an ethics officer. This entire flight is now a live audit." The cabin froze. The silence came first, like a sudden drop in altitude. Then came the whispers, a rustle of disbelief. 2 seats back, a man in a gray sweater leaned out into the aisle, eyes wide. "Did he say audit?" Kellen turned around, stunned, mouth parted, but no words coming out. A man further back, older, with graying hair and a notepad in his lap, clapped once, hesitantly, then more firmly. "He's not bluffing," the man said, raising his voice slightly. "I saw this on the news once. These audits are real." More murmurs followed. Someone took out their phone. Another passenger sat up straighter, whispering to his companion. The word ethics officer began passing from row to row like a match struck in the dark. At the front, Norrin backed away from the handset slowly. His hand fell from the receiver. His jaw clenched. Kael looked directly at him, the badge still raised. "They thought I came here to speak softly," Kael said. His tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. Each syllable cut through the air like metal shearing glass. He lowered the badge. "But I came to end the noise." The attendant smirked, confident his act would go unnoticed, unaware that every second had been anticipated and that the CEO's calm, decisive response was ready to neutralize the threat instantly. "If you believe cruelty under privilege always folds when skill and precision intervene. Hit subscribe now, because justice never hesitates. The cockpit door cracked open with a soft hiss, and Captain Elric Morrow stepped into the aisle, his brow furrowed, jaw tight. His eyes scanned the front cabin, passengers staring wide-eyed, a flight attendant visibly trembling, and a seated man with presence like steel and a voice that calmly sliced through the tension. "What's going on up here?" Morrow's voice cut through the rising murmurs like a razor through cloth. Kael Drevick didn't wait. He rose slowly from his seat, his movements deliberate, restrained, yet commanding. He met the captain's gaze without blinking. "Captain," he said, voice measured, firm, "I'm invoking Article 7B of in-flight federal oversight under Ethical Violation Code, R Delta." A stillness fell over the front of the cabin like a curtain dropping. The words had weight. The code, a rarely used but legally binding clause, was familiar to Morrow. It had been issued to all commercial captains after the GenX ethics collapse, a scandal that had rewritten regulatory procedures in less than 72 hours. To invoke it in midair was not theater. It was a declaration of emergency at the compliance level. Morrow blinked, processing. Before he could respond, Norrin Vale stepped forward, voice sharpened with faux authority. "Sir, this passenger is making baseless threats. He's clearly unstable, possibly under chemical stress. I advise we isolate him until—" Kael raised one hand, not aggressively, but with enough presence to cut Norrin's sentence clean. "There are recordings," Kael said without turning. "There are test strips, chemical residue, time-stamped logs, and a growing list of passenger statements." And he now pivoted slightly toward the captain. "You have a flight attendant whose name tag does not match his original boarding manifest, carrying a spray device that isn't listed in the inventory log." For a split second, Captain Morrow didn't move. Then he looked to Kellen, who had been hovering like a shadow against the galley wall. "Kellen," he said sharply, "do you confirm this?" Kellen's voice cracked as he nodded quickly. "Why, yes, Captain." His badge said H. Dern before takeoff. "I saw him switch it in the galley. And the spray canisters, he said it was just odor control, but it didn't smell like anything I've used before." Morrow's face hardened. "Mr. Vale," the captain said slowly, voice lowering into something colder than command, "step away from the galley." He turned to Kellen. "Open the secure kit. Retrieve the containment sleeve." Norrin didn't move at first. His posture stiffened. His eyes flicked to Kael, then to the cockpit, calculating. But Kael didn't need to speak. The leverage had already shifted. Kellen unlatched a small security panel near the galley, pulling out a sleek, vacuum-sealed pouch, its blue seal marked with the crest of the Federal Aviation Oversight Bureau. The containment sleeve wasn't used unless contamination or tampering was suspected. Its appearance wasn't just procedure, it was indictment. A ripple ran through the passengers as the implication landed. Quiet gasps, the rustle of a coat, the subtle click of someone restarting their camera recording. Norrin's facade cracked just slightly. His hands moved slowly, but his feet did not. "I don't know what you think you're doing," he muttered. "This is protocol for—" "It's not protocol to spray a passenger directly in the face," Kael said, tone low but biting. "It's not protocol to swap badges. And it's not protocol to lie about the contents of a chemical dispersal can." Morrow's eyes didn't leave Norrin. "You've got 5 seconds, Mr. Vale. Don't make me call code lock." That did it. Norrin stepped back from the galley and raised his hands, just slightly, mock surrender tangled with bitterness. Kellen, still visibly shaken, handed over the sleeve, and Morrow secured the spray device inside. Kael could see the tension in the captain's neck as he sealed it with a magnetic snap. He was holding himself together, but barely. "Captain," Kael said again, quieter now, "requesting emergency diversion to Halderan Field. This flight is now legally under ethical lockdown. I'll forward the data files and evidence packets to the compliance team upon landing." Morrow nodded grimly. "I'll file the alert code manually. No one touches the manifest or comm logs until we're grounded. You have my word." He turned and disappeared into the cockpit, the door sliding shut with a solid finality. Kael sat again, feeling the full weight of the moment. Around him, Passengers whispered. No one argued. No one rolled their eyes. Whatever this was, it was real. He felt the shift like a cold draft beneath the surface of his calm. Across the aisle, Renard Voss slouched in his seat, eyes staring forward, expression unreadable. His earlier smirks were gone. No more commentary. No more games. Kael folded his hands. A long breath in, a longer one out. They tried to override the cabin, but they forgot. Some passengers write the code. The descent began with a soft chime and the quiet whir of engines throttling back. But inside the first-class cabin of Telvian Flight 227, the atmosphere felt denser than before, as if the pressure drop signaled not just altitude, but a shift in control. Kael Drevick kept his posture steady as the aircraft tilted into its glide path. Outside, the clouds broke open to reveal the tarmac lights of Halderan Field, but inside, all eyes were fixed on what had just unfolded. Norrin Vale sat slouched in the forward galley, his arms bound tightly with security-grade Velcro cuffs. Kellen sat beside him, upright but visibly trembling, hands folded tightly over his lap, lips pressed into a determined line. He wasn't just a witness anymore. He was a participant in an investigation that would rewrite federal procedures. Kael remained seated for now, but his gaze swept the cabin like a scanner. Passengers leaned into one another, murmuring about what they had seen and what it might mean. The woman across the aisle clutched her inhaler. A man in 2D tapped at his phone, the lens still angled discreetly toward the galley. Evidence was everywhere, raw, unfiltered, undeniable. Then came the first man to approach. "Excuse me," he said softly, holding out his phone to Kael. "I recorded the whole thing, from when he sprayed you to when you stood up and made the announcement. If you need it, I'm willing to give a formal statement." Kael looked at the man, noting the sincerity etched into the lines around his eyes. He accepted the phone briefly, ensuring the footage synced to the compliance relay before nodding his thanks. "You may have just saved more than one life." Another voice joined in, a deeper tone, weathered but sure. "I work in pharmaceuticals," the man said, his glasses reflecting the dimmed cabin lights. "That wasn't air freshener. That was a dispersant. I know the chemical signature. I could smell it instantly. Acetone base with trace ammonium." Kael nodded, his voice low. "You're not the only one who noticed. Thank you." The data uploaded cleanly. One more node in the growing network of truth. From the front, Captain Morrow's voice filtered calmly through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our final approach in a Halderan Field due to a technical irregularity. Please remain seated and ensure all devices are secured." His words were practiced, neutral, but every syllable carried weight. The captain wasn't just managing descent, he was managing the narrative, making sure panic didn't outrun protocol. Kael rose slowly, feeling the low hum of the aircraft's systems through the floor. Across the aisle, a movement caught his eye. Renard Voss, formerly a shadow in seat 3C, was now easing out of his row, slipping toward the aisle under the pretense of heading for the lavatory. Kael moved before anyone else could. One step, firm and deliberate, placed him directly in Renard's path. "I wouldn't," Kael said quietly, but with a force that made Renard freeze mid-step. Renard's eyes flicked to the forward galley, then to the rear. Calculating. Kael held up his left wrist, revealing the sleek black band just under the cuff of his jacket. "That wristband you saw earlier," he said, his voice calm, controlled. "It's geotagged. You leave this section, and the alert goes direct to homeland." For a split second, the bluff might have seemed possible. But then Renard saw the flicker on Kael's band, an active pulse. The real-time beacon. No bluff. No second chances. Renard stepped back without another word. Kael remained standing a moment longer, watching the man who had once sat comfortably behind corporate firewalls, now trapped in the very system he thought he'd outsmarted. The irony wasn't lost on him. His AI protocol, designed to flag unethical behavior in hostile environments, had once been dismissed as overreach. Too sensitive, too speculative. But now it had exposed a live field test. And not just any test. A coordinated behavioral escalation targeting him mid-flight. Kael glanced out the window again. The runway lights of Norrin Vale glowed brighter now, guiding the jet into final approach. Around him, the passengers began to shift with the mechanical groan of lowering gear and flaps, but no one was thinking about turbulence or touchdown anymore. In Kael's mind, the data had already begun mapping the chain of events. The unauthorized name tag, the scent composition, the microdispersant's chemical trace, the Bluetooth mic embedded behind seat 3C, all building towards something larger. This wasn't an isolated breach. This was a systems test masquerading as cabin service. And yet, because he had stayed calm, because he had chosen evidence over outrage, the system was about to face him on record. As the wheels touched down with a smooth, deliberate thud, Kael exhaled slowly. One breath. That was all it had taken to start it. And now, every breath after that belongs to the investigation. The plane touched down smoothly at Norrin Vale, but the calm descent belied the storm waiting on the ground. As the aircraft rolled toward the jet bridge, Kael Drevick caught his first glimpse of the tarmac through the cabin window. Not just baggage carts and maintenance crew, but a full federal compliance response team. Their posture was unmistakable, badges visible, jackets marked with Department of Civil Aero Integrity, containment cases in tow, and a federal transport van idling with both side doors wide open, engines humming like a courtroom about to convene. Inside the cabin, silence had taken over. The hum of the engines was the only sound beneath the pressurized hush, broken only by the click of seat belts unfastening in first class. Captain Elric Morrow emerged from the cockpit with quiet resolve, walking down the aisle with a sealed envelope in hand. He paused at Kael's seat and handed over the document, an official manifest printout. Every crew member on record, the captain said, his voice low but firm, including the switch. Kael met his gaze, nodding once with solemn appreciation. He didn't need to ask who the switch referred to. Norrin Vale's name was circled. The front doors hissed open with a pneumatic gasp, and the air shifted, cooler, laced with tension. Compliance officers stepped in, flanking the entry with practiced precision. The lead officer, a tall man with a slate-gray clipboard and wireframe glasses, gave a subtle nod to Morrow. The unspoken message, begin. Norrin Vale was brought forward first, wrists bound in wide black Velcro cuffs. His face was pale, but his jaw clenched, refusing to show regret. He didn't say a word as he stepped over the threshold and into the arms of the waiting officers. Flashbulbs clicked from behind tinted van windows. The corridor of silence that opened around him was louder than any accusation. Kael followed moments later, walking under escort, not because he was under suspicion, but because of who he was and what he carried. One compliance officer at each shoulder, their presence a form of acknowledgement rather than restraint. His briefcase remained securely in his grip, its contents more than proprietary. They were now pieces of evidence. As Kael stepped into the jet bridge, he noticed a cluster of passengers lingering behind the security perimeter. Some offered quiet nods of support. Others were already speaking with officers, giving statements in hushed voices. One man held up a phone. "I recorded everything," he said, "from the first spray to the confrontation in the galley." Kael offered a brief nod. "Thank you. That footage could help more than you know." Just beyond the boarding gate, Renard Voss stood cornered near a folding table set up by federal agents. His hands were not cuffed, but two officers flanked him with rigid posture. A tech specialist was inspecting his seat assignment, credentials, and carry-on, though one item had already caught attention: a Bluetooth mic, surgically glued inside the seatback tray where Kael had been sitting. Kael's AI had flagged it during the descent, triggering a silent geoping that linked the device directly to Renard's prior employer, Virulon Systems. Kael walked straight to the evidence desk set up near Gate 34. A male compliance registrar in a Navy windbreaker stepped forward. "Dr. Drevick." Kael opened his briefcase, removed a sealed containment pouch, and handed it over. Air sample strip, coated for ammonium compound. Taken 27 minutes after exposure. Next came the beverage cup, sealed, labeled, and time-stamped. Chemical residue confirmed via strip test, Kael added. Unknown dispersant agent. Induced cough response in at least 3 passengers. The officer received each item carefully, logging them with methodical precision. An wrist relay. Kael activated the relay's external port, syncing the memory bank to the compliance unit scanner. Full audio stream. Cabin sensor logs. Timestamps of every protocol violation from the moment I boarded. The officer's eyebrows lifted slightly at the volume of data. You were tracking the event in real time? I built the oversight layer they tried to circumvent, Kael said flatly. The device recognized the protocol anomaly before my senses did. Another officer approached. Do you require medical attention? Kael exhaled once, slowly. His throat still burned faintly. No, what I need, he said, is a meeting room with a screen and 3 power outlets. The officer blinked. Excuse me? Kael met his eyes, unshaken. I have a decryption module to run. I'm not done. They stood in silence for a beat, the request hanging in the air like a challenge. Then the registrar nodded. We'll clear one near the operations bay. Kael turned away as another agent began cross-referencing Renard Voss's expired credentials against a federal watch list. The AI tag embedded in Kael's wrist relay had already isolated 2 overlapping names between Renard's current alias and a Virulon contract breach flagged 6 months ago. Kael knew what this meant. Renard hadn't just come to observe. He had come to test, to confirm whether Kael's ethics framework could detect real-time behavioral manipulation. As Kael walked toward the elevator that would take him to the makeshift operations room, he paused for a moment and looked back at the aircraft, still connected to the gate like a suspended accusation. Foreshadowing lingered in the air. There would be more names, more flights, and somewhere in a boardroom far from his terminal, someone was already drafting a statement, trying to control a narrative that had already slipped away. But Kael wasn't interested in narratives. He was interested in truth. And truth, today, had stepped off that plane in full daylight. The landing wasn't the end. It was the opening argument. Behavioral escalation, 6C override. The words blinked on the screen like a quiet siren. Cold, unauthorized, dated 3 hours before takeoff. Kael Drevick leaned forward in the steel-framed chair, his eyes narrowing beneath the stark white fluorescence of the debriefing room. On the terminal before him, Telvian Air's internal protocol logs. The interface was simple, monochrome, utilitarian, but what it revealed was anything but routine. This wasn't pushed from Telvian's control, one of the federal ethics officers muttered, scrolling rapidly through the data chain. Look, this originated externally. Proxy IP, but the credentials match an old contractor login. Cross-referencing now. A second officer, broader in frame and wearing a dark gray utility jacket, tapped the table lightly with his knuckles. Got it. The name attached to the override is Alan Vostrick, former IT consultant. Last listed employer? He turned the tablet toward Kael. Virulon Systems. Kael didn't blink. His voice was even, but his spine straightened like a lock clicking into place. Renard Voss's former post. The officers exchanged glances. One of them, Agent Thayer, badge clipped neatly to his collar, jotted a quick note and looked back up. This push wasn't just unauthorized. It was strategically timed. The override flagged your seat number directly. Whoever did this, they knew you'd be on that flight. Kael exhaled once through his nose and sat back, blazer folded on the back of the chair, sleeves rolled up to his forearms. His fingers tapped lightly on the table, steady, methodical. Across from him, 2 sealed evidence bags sat under a spotlight, each containing a pressurized canister labeled with vague floral names, Drift Petal and Crisp Bloom. But there was no mistaking what they were. Open the second one, Kael said quietly, gesturing toward the bag marked Crisp Bloom. The officer obliged, carefully removing the canister and placing it on a testing rig. As the chemical analyzer began to hum, Kael stepped forward and tapped the label with a fingertip. Look at the second compound listed in the ingredients, he said. Agent Thayer squinted. Hexylammoniate dispersal agent. I've never seen that on standard retail aerosols. You wouldn't, Kael replied, calm but firm. That compound was banned for use in enclosed environments by the Federal Ethics and Environmental Health Bureau 2 years ago. It can cause respiratory inflammation, memory disruption, and in higher doses, emotional volatility. "How do you know that?" asked the second officer, already leaning in. Kael's gaze didn't waver. "Because I built the database that banned it." The room went still. Only the low drone of the analyzer filled the air now. Even the lights seemed to dim beneath the weight of Kael's words. Across the table, the officers sat straighter, a new respect, or perhaps concern, settling in. "You're telling us this chemical, this exact variant, is already on the federal blacklist?" Thayer asked. "Yes," Kael replied. "And someone went to great lengths to reintroduce it through a commercial airline cabin. It wasn't just a test. It was a probe, a behavioral experiment using unauthorized materials on unsuspecting passengers." The analyzer beeped, and the screen lit up with a confirmed chemical signature. Red highlight. "Warning issued. Banned agent detected." "That's a confirmation," muttered the second officer. "Jesus." Kael's voice was lower now, but it carried even more force. "You need to run that same compound through every in-flight supply manifest Helvian submitted in the last 90 days. If this wasn't an isolated incident, we may be looking at a wider deployment." There was a knock at the door. A supervisor stepped in, clipboard in hand, face unreadable. He was tall, older, and walked like someone who had seen too many truths too late. He glanced around the room, then locked eyes with Kael. "Dr. Drevick," he said gravely, "you're going to want to see this." He handed the clipboard to Thayer, who scanned it quickly. His brow furrowed. "What is it?" Kael asked. Thayer turned the board around. "Last week. Same type of spray. Different airline. A different passenger. Didn't report it until they collapsed mid-flight. We didn't have a link until now." Kael's jaw tightened, but his expression remained composed. "And now?" Thayer met his gaze. "Now we have one." Virulon's name was in the authorization code again. Different consultant login, but the same chain. You caught it mid-act. The silence that followed was deafening. Kael felt it in his chest, the slow crystallization of a truth he'd suspected since the moment the chemical hit his throat. This wasn't a fluke. It was a pattern, and patterns meant infrastructure, backing, intent. The weight of it pressed against him, but he didn't retreat from it. He walked over to the table, stared down at the canister, then at the flashing screen. The very ethics charter he'd planned to present in Veltrin, his company's magnum opus on AI compliance and integrity testing, was now being used in real time. Not as a policy, but as a lifeline, a shield, a sword. "They thought I'd be too shaken to track this," he said aloud, voice quiet but clear. "But the moment I saw the mist, I knew exactly what they were doing." Thayer leaned forward. "You think it's part of something larger?" "I don't think," Kael answered. "I know." He picked up the clipboard, flipped to the incident photo. A different man, slumped in his seat, an oxygen mask over his face. Same pattern of spraying. Same symptoms. Same silence. Kael set the board down and looked back at the evidence bags. "Sometimes you write the rule book," he said, stepping toward the doorway. "And sometimes you catch them trying to burn it." The courtroom-style tribunal chamber echoed with the sound of the chairperson's gavel striking wood. Cameras weren't allowed, but the tension inside the hearing room at the Civil Aero Board headquarters buzzed like static. Kael Drevick sat still in the front row, his hands folded atop a thick black folder labeled Ethics Protocol Breach, Telvian Air FLT 227. He didn't glance at the journalists in the back, nor at the rows of federal transportation auditors watching from the gallery. His eyes were fixed on the screen at the center of the room, waiting for the only thing that truly mattered, the truth projected in high resolution. Just 12 hours earlier, the story had detonated across every major news outlet. Kael hadn't even turned on the hotel television when the first call came in. "They're leading with your footage," his assistant had said breathlessly. "Chemical assault, ethics violation, passenger safety, all of it." The words weren't what caught Kael off guard. It was the velocity. News anchors spoke his name, not as a CEO, but as a whistleblower. The footage from the plane, muted audio of Norrin spraying the silver canister, Kael coughing, Kellen frozen in fear, ran in loops beside bold headlines. CEO exposes in-flight chemical assault. Telvian Air halts flights, pending review. Federal Ethics Tribunal to convene emergency oversight hearing. But Kael gave no statements. No interviews. No denial. He let the footage speak. Now, in this tribunal room, the footage was queued up again, but this time with Kael's annotations, timestamps, I calculated posture shifts, pattern recognition overlays showing Norrin's repeated targeting of Kael's airspace. And finally, the data logs from Kael's own wrist relay, showing live chemical exposure metrics climbing with every pass of the canister. The chairperson, a tall man with storm gray hair and a voice like dry gravel, addressed the assembly. This tribunal is not just convened for one flight. It is for a principle. For years, we have heard allegations of unauthorized behavioral testing in public transportation. Today, we have evidence. Kael rose, approached the podium slowly. Not to argue, not to dramatize, but to present. He laid out each artifact with precision. The strip from the test cup, now darkened with ammonium signature. The sealed video drive from the backup tray camera. The internal communication log showing Norrin's name tag switch, still unmatched to any standard crew manifest. Behind him, digital screens displayed snippets of supporting data. One showed Renard Voss's expired ID, flagged through Kael's AI protocol as belonging to a terminated Nexelian employee. Another played slowed-down footage of Norrin whispering into a handheld device in the galley. No official airline headset, just a repurposed override tool. One by one, Kael narrated the facts. No embellisments, no speculation, just evidence layered with implication. They didn't just endanger passengers, he said finally. They believed the cabin was a test chamber. That behavior could be provoked, recorded, and fed back into a system. But ethics don't bend under pressure. They reveal themselves. Silence hung for a long moment. Then the chairperson nodded and gestured to the technician. Proceed with final slide. The screen blinked. A single image filled the chamber, grainy, pulled from cabin footage but unmistakable. Kellen, the trainee attendant, standing partially between Kael and Norrin, arms low but firm, body angled protectively. A collective shift moved through the room. The photo wasn't powerful because of the composition. It was powerful because of the caption Kael had added, now displayed in stark white text beneath it. Integrity isn't about knowing everything. It's about standing up the moment something feels wrong. The quote landed with impact, followed by silence. Not even rustling papers. Just breath. Kael stepped down. The tribunal deliberated for less than 20 minutes, procedural, but unanimous. The Civil Aero Board voted to adopt Kael's ethics compliance framework across all major domestic carriers, effective immediately. Every in-flight incident, every crew protocol override, and every non-standard device would now be monitored using behavioral flagging, AI integrity baselines, and real-time passenger health logs. Outside, a reporter waited by the steps, but Kael passed by without a word, briefcase in hand, blazer buttoned. He wasn't there to gloat. He wasn't there for fame. He had written the framework not for applause, but to stop a system from forgetting what safety meant. Later that evening, back in the dim quiet of his hotel room, Kael opened his laptop and sent one final transmission to the Civil Aero Board. An encrypted zip folder titled Virulent_parallel test case_archive 1. It contained raw data from his own company's older research, data Renard may have stolen. A preemptive step, because if someone tried this once, they'd try it again. As he closed the laptop, a news update scrolled across the bottom of the TV screen. The camera panned across Telvian's grounded fleet. Norrin Vale's face was now paired with the words, formally charged. Renard Voss, in federal custody. Kael didn't smile. He just looked out the window toward the faint lights over Halderan Field and whispered to himself, one flight, one spray, one refusal to sit quiet. That's what rewrote the rules. Kael stood in silence beneath the harsh white lights of Halderan Field's restructured West Terminal. The plaque was unguarded, unmoved, except by the reflection of security strobes flickering behind its bronze engraving. He ran his thumb once over the first line. To those who breathed in danger and exhaled accountability. His reflection stared back, older than the week before, Not in years, but in weight. The corridor was quiet. It always was this early. Gate 34 remained closed to traffic, repurposed as part of the newly established Kael Drevick Ethics Corridor, a place designed not for departures, but remembrance. Footsteps echoed behind him. Kael didn't turn. "You're early," he said. Captain Elric Morrow stepped beside him, still in partial uniform, now stripped of its Telvian insignia. His new badge read Telvian Integrity Board, Oversight Lead. He adjusted his collar, nodding toward the plaque. "They said they wanted a statue," Morrow muttered, folding his arms. "You said no." "I said they should fix their procedures before they fix a face in metal," Kael replied, his voice low. Silence settled again, heavy but not bitter. Morrow gestured toward the corridor's central display, where a rolling loop showed parts of the tribunal testimony, blurred footage from Flight 227, and a quote from Kellen's upcoming memoir. "They told us to follow protocol. No one said what to do when the protocol was poison." Kael's eyes lingered on it. "How is he?" "He's doing well. Promoted to Safety Protocol Coordinator last week." And Morrow allowed a rare smile. "He's nervous about the book title." "Let him be. His fear is honest." "That makes it valuable," Kael replied. Morrow looked sideways at Kael. "You ever going to forgive yourself?" Kael's jaw tightened, but his tone remained steady. "Forgiveness is for those who did something wrong. I just didn't see it fast enough." The corridor lights dimmed as a new exhibit powered up, a real-time simulation of Kael's AI integrity system, now federally certified and embedded into commercial aircraft protocols. It didn't just capture events, it contextualized them. Not just when something happened, but why, and what the intent behind the behavior might have been. Kael stepped forward and tapped the interface. "This is what we were building before they tried to dismantle it." "You've given them a framework," Morrow said. "It's more than any boardroom could have hoped for." Kael turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "They didn't try to break the project, Elric. They tried to break trust between passenger and crew, between silence and truth. The project was just an excuse." Morrow's face grew serious. "And what's next?" Kael walked toward Gate 34's sealed door, placing one hand on the brushed metal. "Next is making sure no one ever has to choose between breathing and speaking up." He glanced back one last time at the empty terminal. It didn't need applause. It didn't need press. It needed memory and action. Hours later, in the Summit Auditorium across the city, Kael stood on stage in a dark suit. No slides, no charts, just a black screen behind him. He looked across the room, CEOs, federal investigators, flight ethics officers, and data engineers all waiting for him to speak. But he didn't use jargon. He didn't explain chip schematics or neural net optimizations. He simply clicked to the next slide. The screen turned white. One sentence appeared. "They tried to spray the air to make me invisible. Turns out, they just made the truth easier to see." He let the silence settle, then added, his voice calm, but carrying through every corner of the auditorium. "When you weaponize assent, you forget it only takes one breath for someone to wake up." One controlled response later, the threat was neutralized, leaving the crew stunned and the cabin silent. If you believe real authority acts decisively to enforce accountability, subscribe now, because justice always lands first. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It highlights abuse of authority, prejudice, and the power of composure and strategic action in confronting wrongdoing. Its purpose is to raise awareness, inspire empathy, and encourage conversations about equality, accountability, and respect for every passenger.